Good afternoon, everybody. I'm here at the SES headquarters in Bankstown, just having received the most recent information from SES Commissioner York and Minister Elliott. Regrettably, parts of the Mid-North Coast are experiencing a 1 in 100-year event, and whilst we don't think things will worsen on the Mid-North Coast, definitely conditions will continue. So the rainfall will continue across the parts that have already been affected, Mid-North Coast, Central Coast, and of course our concern now is focused on the Hawkesbury Valley and also Western Sydney. But in relation to the Mid-North Coast, the rain is expected to continue for the next few days, and we are watching the situation there very closely. The Central Coast, conditions haven't changed, however they're ongoing. But the main focus today is, of course, the Richmond community, the Hawkesbury Valley community and parts of Western Sydney. We are now envisaging a 1 in 50-year event. Yesterday we were hoping it would only be a 1 in 20-year event. It looks like it will be a 1 in 50-year event, and that means potentially another 4,000 people may be asked to evacuate in and around that Hawkesbury region and parts of Western Sydney. We'll know in the next few hours whether that's the case, and we ask everybody to please continue watching the information and to follow advice if you are asked to evacuate. So far there are 13 evacuation centres that have been set up across the state, Mid-North Coast, the Hunter and parts of the Richmond and the Hawkesbury communities, and of course we will continue to monitor that. In the first instance, if you have been asked to evacuate, we ask you to consider moving in with relatives and friends in the first instance, but of course there will also be emergency accommodation forthcoming if you require it. The latest weather forecast we have suggests that the rainfall will continue into Thursday. Yesterday it was Thursday, Friday. Today it's receded a day into Thursday. But concerningly, there's also a weather front coming in from the Northern Territory, which will impact in parts of inland New South Wales. And so some regional communities will be on alert from Monday, Tuesday when that front hits the inland of New South Wales. So it won't just be the coastal areas that have currently been impacted, but far further west in major towns across the state. So we just ask everybody to be extremely cautious. I thank everybody for your patience. Thank everybody who have had to wait. So far the SES has responded to more than 6,700 calls since the weather event began, and hundreds and hundreds of people have been rescued from the waters. We ask that everybody be extra cautious. This is not a time to be out and about unless you have to be. And I also want to thank 3 states, South Australia, Victoria and Queensland, that have already provided assistance in terms of flood rescue, and that's really where we need support. It's difficult weather conditions, which means that getting helicopters and such in the air is not a good idea, so we're relying on ground crews. And we're grateful that because of there has been so much flooding, that we do have some expert flood rescue support from the other states, and we're grateful for that. Minister Elliott will now give an update, especially in relation to disaster assistance. He and his colleagues in the Commonwealth have already designated many local government areas as disaster-ridden, which means assistance can start flowing, and Commissioner York will of course give us the most recent update from the SES perspective. And can I also thank all the agencies that are supporting the SES, all of our volunteers, but also all the other state government agencies that are working in through the SES to make sure we get support to people as soon as needed.
Thanks, Premier. Last night I spoke to David Littleproud, the Federal Minister responsible for emergencies, and we signed off 16 national disaster declarations. They are 16 local government areas, primarily in the north of the state, and they will get that assistance. The recovery phase has already started. I've spoken to Shane Fitzsimmons amongst the other agencies, and we will from today commence the recovery phase. So those national disaster declarations will mean that residents affected by these floodwaters can begin to receive that assistance. Councils can begin to receive that assistance. That obviously includes low interest, if not zero interest loans. People get assistance to recover damage made to their homes. There are subsidies for the movement of freight in the event that livestock and of course agriculture need to be moved around the state. So That will be followed over the course of the next couple of days by a number of other packages, both state and federal packages. So the people that are being badly affected by this don't have to suffer the ongoing anxiety of wondering where the assistance will be coming from. We will be working very, very hard to make sure that those announcements are made as swiftly as possible and the money gets rolled out the door. Just on flood rescues, overnight we had 74 flood rescues, and motorists in this state need to know statistically we are moving closer and closer to the inevitable fatality. So we cannot say it enough. Do not put yourselves in danger. Do not put the agencies that are there to assist you in the event of a flood rescue in danger. This is just the wrong time of the year to be taking any risks. I am horrified to think that there are unnecessary flood rescues going on. Of course there will be the inevitable. There are a number of houses that are just going to be surrounded by floodwaters, and that will be necessary. But the unnecessary risks that are being taken still by these motorists is beginning to wear thin on the authorities. It is an offence, and I think that people need to be reminded that inevitably with the damage that's been done across the road network in this state, a fatality is getting more and more likely. I'll just hand over to the Commissioner.
Thank you very much. And so from an operational perspective, we're very much in a response capability up in the Mid-North Coast, Hunter and Central Coast areas, where we're watching the floodwaters and working very closely with Bureau of Meteorology in relation to the rainfalls. As the Minister said, there have been a number of rescues, 670 flood rescues over this event, with 6,700 calls for assistance. We're working very strongly with our emergency service partners and the police in relation to making sure we respond to all those calls for assistance. We're now particularly worried around that Hawkesbury Nepean area. The Warragamba Dam did start to spill yesterday afternoon with the rain coming into the catchment area, and that is affecting the low-lying areas of the Hawkesbury Nepean. The latest weather forecast for the Bureau of Meteorology is forecasting even heavier rains than we had expected in their forecast from yesterday, and so we're working on a number of evacuation warnings to let people know that they are possibly at risk in relation to the rising flood levels. So we'd ask the community of the Hawkesbury Nepean Valley to be very alert to information going out on the SES website, as well as the Bureau of Meteorology website. Now, if they do get an evacuation warning, we ask them to get ready. So put their possessions up to a higher level in their houses or in their sheds, pack an emergency kit with your valuables, your identity documents and things that you need to take just in case you're away for a number of days, and we will be letting them know where they can safely evacuate to. But always in this COVID safe environment, we do ask people to evacuate firstly to family and friends if that is possible. Make your arrangements now, contact them and understand where you can go and what routes of the roads that you can take. For the information on the roads and the accessibility and evacuation routes, Live Traffic is always updating their information, and it does go down to the council roads and give more information for those more remote areas as well, so that people can know what's safe to travel. So coming into a working week, we are working with the Department of Education as well. There will be a number of schools, I'm advised, that will be closing in the Mid-North Coast area, not opening for students to attend tomorrow, and they will be putting out information as well. So I encourage those residents to have a look at what information the Department of Education puts out. Going to work, a lot of, even though your home may not be affected, your work premises will be affected in some areas. So once again, know if you do need to go to work, make arrangements to work from home or not to have to attend work. And again, look at the access roads. Your office or area of work may be open, but you may not be able to safely get to that. And we do not want people on the roads unnecessarily and putting themselves at risk, their families at risk, and my rescue volunteers attending. As spoken about before, also we have reached out to other states because we require some assistance in relation to flood rescue operators. So we've got 85 personnel coming from both South Australia and Queensland, and requesting an additional 40 coming from Victoria. So that will supplement the resources that SES and our emergency service partners can put on the ground over the next few days. I need to make sure that all our rescue operators are ready and fit for their task, and that input from the other states will be greatly received by us. And that's probably where we're at the moment. Thanks.
Commissioner, while we have you there, can we ask you a question first? We understand water authorities are saying that the amount of water that's going to go into Warragamba Dam over the next week is about 3/4 of the capacity that it's at, at the moment. Where is all that water going to go? And have you mapped out evacuation routes for people in Western Sydney?
We have part of the planning for any event like this is working with our other government agency partners in relation to traffic evacuation routes, planning, evacuation centres, and doing the planning with councils in relation to where we anticipate those floods will go. So we've got a lot of historical intelligence that we draw on in relation to these floods, and very important when we talk about a 1 to 5, 1 to 10, 1 to 20, etc. flood, is we know exactly or near enough to where that flood water will go. We anticipate some increase in the spillage out of the dam because of the heavy rainfall that will go into the catchment area. And also some of this rain moving down towards the Goulburn area is just because it stopped or ceases raining here in Sydney. Doesn't mean the catchment area isn't still filling from the Goulburn area, because that flows into the Warragamba Dam as well. So purpose of our evacuation warnings is to tell those people that we anticipate where that flood water will be going, so that they're ready, so that they have time to prepare, and we make sure that we don't lose any lives or try and restrict the damage to properties by giving them ample notice. And then if the case is we need an evacuation order, we do request, don't assume that you'll be all right. Don't assume that in February last year the floodwaters didn't affect your house. This is worse than what we had in February last year. And please take heed of what the SES is saying. We will have in some areas door knocking. And I would like to add, there are some areas up in the mid-north coast where we are having some electricity outages. So we're working with our energy providers to get electricity back on, and some of that tornado yesterday at Chester Hill, and there's some areas in Sydney that have lost power. And as I say, we're working very hard to get that power restored. And also some of the areas in mid-north coast is there's some telecommunications problems with some phones, and again we're working with the providers to make sure that we can get information out in a variety of ways.
From you, you see not interest, then would you like to add anything? 12 evacuation routes we've seen obviously across Western Sydney. Is that enough? Is the West equipped to deal with what we're seeing and all that water?
Look, as Commissioner York said, obviously we are anticipating a 1 in 50 year event for most parts of that Hawkesbury, Nepean Valley, Nepean region, and obviously those plans kick into place. We are asking people to make sure they update themselves on what the road closure situation is, but also to follow the advice provided in terms of gathering key documents, gathering key belongings, and also having a plan ready if you are asked to evacuate. So if you're in an area which is on high alert, please contact in the first instance relatives or friends that you may be able to stay with over the next few days. And in the absence of that, of course, if you are evacuated, we'll make sure you have somewhere safe to go. So it is a very serious situation, and whilst the situation on the mid-north coast, the Hunter and the Central Coast we're monitoring, they are stable even though they're going to get extra rainfall. The major concern is at this stage the Hawkesbury Nepean Valley and where that's likely to go, because potentially it could result in between 3,000 and 4,000 people being asked to evacuate over the next few days. That's why we're asking people in those communities to be on high alert, to follow the advice. And as Commissioner York said, just because you didn't have to succumb to this last year or in the last 5 years, please don't assume it won't happen to you. This is, at this stage, we anticipate a 1 in 50 year event, so it's nothing like we've seen since the 1960s, and it's really important for everybody to be on high alert.
Is the reason that you're mainly concerned or focused on that area, Hawkesbury Nepean, specifically because of the fact Warragamba is set to spill
No,
over?
that's not the only reason. It's because of the amount of rainfall that's expected there. We're advised, and perhaps Commissioner York can provide more detail. Just wait for that lantern now, sorry. Commissioner York may be able to provide further detail, but the advice is that the weather conditions will actually get worse in terms of rainfall. So it's a whole range of issues. It's the sustained rainfall, the fact the weather event has settled in, it's not moving on, and also, of course, the capacity of the spillover and what that might mean. The dam did spill over the last time 5 years ago, but obviously when it's a 1 in 50-year event in terms of the amount of rainfall and the sustained rainfall, it has a huge impact.
Premier, do we have a number for how many homes have been damaged or destroyed yet in the state?
I'll ask Commissioner York to provide that information, and obviously sometimes you can't tell until the water starts receding, but the damage has been substantial across the state.
I haven't got the number of the homes, but we are working with Resilience New South Wales and doing damage assessments. So it's not only the homes, it's businesses as well, and we're also looking at road damage, because quite a number of roads, particularly in the mid-north coast, have been damaged through to the strong floodwaters, and so that we will make an assessment of what damage has been occurred, and the numbers will be available as we get that information in.
And those additional potential evacuations, have we had any additional warnings as yet or this afternoon?
We haven't had any this morning in the Hawkesbury-Nepean area. They're just working on it now, getting the information and working with the BOM in relation to the expected flood levels, and those warnings will go out. If they haven't gone out while I'm speaking, they'll be going out very shortly.
Just back to the homes for a minute. Are we thinking dozens, hundreds, thousands even?
I'd say it'd be in the few hundred, because not only through the floods, but the mini tornado yesterday took off the roofs, damaged trees. There's a lot of trees down, a lot of storm damage in relation to roofs and houses. So it isn't just the flood water that we have to assess, it's the other impact and damage that comes from flood affected areas. So.
And are you able to say, just on those evacuation orders, which communities around Hawkesbury and Windsor, which area that would be at this stage?
I haven't got the list in front of me, but it goes around McGrath's Hill is one of the areas we're looking at, which brings within the 1 to 50 year flood. But it will be clearly stated when we put our evacuation warnings and particularly the orders out, we go down to the street or street boundaries that will be identified as those areas at greater risk. And can I say, just in relation to the question asked of the Premier in relation to, it isn't just the dam that we're worried about. There is a network of rivers that flow around the Hawkesbury-Nepean floodplain. With this heavy rain, and when it comes down in the amounts that we are expecting, it causes flash flooding and it fills up those areas. So it isn't just the dam, it's the rivers as well, and then it's the capacity for those rivers to flow out to the sea depending on the tide levels as well, and for the water to get away. And what we're seeing with this continuous rain, it's very difficult for the water to get away to lower the levels. It seems over the last few days it's just being topped up daily.
Minister, you mentioned 16 LGAs where a disaster declaration has been made.
Yep.
Are they the 16 LGAs that were issued in a statement yesterday, or the new one?
No, that's the 16 that we preempted yesterday, and they will go from around the Hunter Valley as far up to the north coast, just near beyond Coffs Harbour.
Do you expect to be issuing more?
Yeah, I would expect as the need arises, I'll be on the phone to the Commonwealth and we'll be signing them off as quickly as we possibly can. And the reason why we do it quickly is because the community needs to know that the funding will be available, particularly those that will be relying on agriculture to rebuild their economies.
On the dam, Minister, do you think enough water is being released from the dam in the lead up to this weather event?
Well, as the member for Warragamba Hills, I've been on the record commenting on that, and it's probably another full and frank conversation we'll have when this is over. But the focus right now is to make sure families remain safe.
How much water do you think would have been required?
Will be at the moment? Sorry, estimate of the clean-up bill?
No, there'll be no idea, because the damage by floodwater varies from community to community, and there'll be some people who have built their houses to be resilient to floodwaters, and others that, like we saw yesterday, a 100-year-old house being taken by the river downstream. So it's never a cheap operation recovering from flood, just like bushfire, and it's just a reality of living in Australia.
How much water do you think should have been released from the dam to make a reasonable difference? When should that have started?
Again, that's a discussion that we will have after this operation is finished.
Do you think we're talking about this too late? Do you think we're talking about releasing water from the dam far too late? Do you think it's
I'll be talking about it at the end of the operation, because we'll need to have advice from the SES. We'll need to take advice from local councils. We'll need to take advice from the police as to what could have been mitigated.
Premier, what do you think enough has been enough water has been released from the Warragamba
I
Dam?
think it's important to echo the words of Commissioner York. When you have a sustained weather event, there are a number of factors that make it a 1 in 50 year event, and it's just frankly the amount of rain over a sustained period which we haven't seen for half a century, and that is important to put in context. We know the rainfall we're likely to receive in the next few days is beyond anyone's expectation, and that's why our first and foremost priority is to make sure people who are in potential evacuation zones know that they have a plan, so that if they are asked to evacuate, they do it quickly. That is our absolute priority. It could be around 4,000 people around the Nepean Hawkesbury Valley and Western Sydney that are directly impacted, and the next few days is very critical for us in that regard. But again, we can't take our eye off the mid and north coast regions, the Hunter regions that have had sustained rainfall and will continue to have sustained rainfall. I understand there'll be some relief on Wednesday on the weather forecast, with again some rain on Thursday, and of course that extra front that's coming through northern New South Wales, which will hit inland New South Wales, is also a concern. So we can't underestimate the ferocity of the extreme weather conditions. We've gone from extreme drought, extreme bushfire to now extreme flood, and we have to put that in context. And our first and foremost priority is to make sure people know they could be in danger and make sure they've got their plans ready so they're not caught unawares. And from speaking to the SES yesterday and today, if you are subject to evacuation order, the aim is to try and make it in daylight hours where it's safer. So we are asking people just to plan ahead, to have those essential things they need to take with them ready, and also potentially have a safe place to go with relatives or friends in the first instance. But failing that, we'll of course make sure that we accommodate people in our evacuation centres, and I assume there'll be more evacuation centres on top of the 13 we already have.
Minister Elliott, do you think when you talk about a 1 in 50 year event, are you saying statewide or just in the Nepean?
Just in the Nepean region. So for example, in some parts of the state it's a 1 in 5 or 1 in 10 year event. In parts of the Northern Rivers area and the Hastings area, it's actually a 1 in 100 year event. So it's not a statewide average. Different parts of the state have been impacted more than others. And what it looks like to be in the Nepean Hawkesbury Valley is a 1 in 50 year event, so going back to the 1960s. So parts of the Hastings community in particular are experiencing a 1 in 100 year event. And that is something we have to put into context. Other parts of the state less severe, but we have to assume the worst in terms of the next few days in the Nepean Hawkesbury Valley. And the rivers in that catchment are just boiling over, and we have to assume that will be a 1 in 50 year event, and that will materialise in the next few days. We're just warning everybody now so they're not caught unawares. We're warning everybody now so that they don't assume it's something similar to what they experienced last year or 5 years ago. A lot of people who will be asked to evacuate have been through it before, but many people who will be asked to evacuate wouldn't have been through that before because they wouldn't have been in the same household for half a century. And that's why we need to put this into context and really ask people to follow the advice and to be ready for the worst possible scenario.
Just on the dam issue again, would it have helped to release water from the dam from Vents Village? And in your view, and have you received any advice or indication on how much water would have needed to be released?
Well, I received advice that some water has been released in the last month. So water has been released in the last month. But given the rainfall that we're experiencing in the next few days, you would have had to have reduced the capacity of the dam to around 20 or 25%, which just wouldn't have been feasible. I mean, that puts into context how much rain we're expecting to get over the next few days. It is a 1.5 century event. And it's not just, you have to look beyond just the dam, it's all the rivers that are overflowing, it's the sustained rainfall in very short periods of time that's been bucketing down. And again, the fact that it's a front that's not moving, it's kind of locked in there for a few days, which again, we've not seen for half a century. So all of that has to be put into context. And that's why it's really important for us, first and foremost, to make sure people know they may need to leave their homes, to be ready for that, and to please take the advice as soon as you get that advice, because we don't want to see any lives lost. The one saving grace in the last few days has been that we don't know of anyone who's lost their lives, and let's keep it that way. Our first and foremost priority is to save lives, save as many properties as possible, but also to give people enough warning. of what's occurring. And I appreciate in parts of the mid and north coast regions which are experiencing the 1 in 100 year event, there's been sustained damage to infrastructure, there's been sustained damage to how people communicate and move around. And I just want to say to everybody in New South Wales who's experiencing that fear and that anxiety, that our thoughts are with you and we'll get assistance to you as soon as we can. But obviously that is limited to in our ability when the rain continues to fall, you know, making sure we have enough flood rescue technicians, which is why we're grateful that 3 other states have supported us in that regard. Ordinarily, a state might deal with one localised flood issue. We're dealing with several, dozens in fact. If you count suburbs or local government areas, you're talking dozens and dozens of regions where you have to put that focus. It is a major operation, the likes of which again we've not seen for a long time. And the breadth and width of this will continue to grow, and that's why it's really important for us to get the message out about people being on high alert, being ready to evacuate when they need to, and already through the SES, our government agencies, and especially Resilience New South Wales, we are forward planning what the next few days and what the recovery will look like.
Mr. Elliott, can I press you on they actually is everybody evacuating when they're told?
Well, I'll ask Commissioner York to comment on that, but the initial feedback I have is that people have been generally very responsive, and we're grateful for that. But I also say to people who perhaps live in a flood-prone area, whose house may have not been taken the last few occasions when they've been on alert, this is different. What we're going through now is different to what you've been through for the last 50 years. So please take it seriously. If you were put on high alert the last time there was a flooding incident and your house was okay, don't assume it'll be okay this time, because what we're going through is something we haven't seen in some parts of the state for a century, in other parts of the state for half a century. And I'll just ask Commissioner York to comment on that as well, because it is very important to make sure people take the advice as soon as they receive it, given how serious and severe this extreme weather condition is.
At this stage, I'd like to thank the community for heeding our warnings and evacuating where we have given evacuation warnings and evacuation orders as well. I'm not aware of any forced evacuations of anyone across any of the affected areas. The only issues that we've mainly had is where the rains have been heavier than forecasted, and some of the flash flooding has meant that people have been cut off without any warning, and we've gone in to rescue some of those people from their homes and use the other emergency services where required to respond to their requests for help. But the community has been very good in relation to it, although there has been a few road rescues where people have not only driven into the areas, but by going out often get trapped between 2 locations of flooding and can't get there and become very distressed, particularly if they've got children or elderly people in their vehicles, and again we've had to respond to that to assist them. And we've also sadly had no deaths, which is great, but a flood rescue of 2 teenagers that were involved in relation to a dam. So I take the opportunity to say don't walk or play in flood waters as well. It can be very deceptive. You don't know what the ground is like underneath. You don't know where the drains are that can suck you into the drain system. And the water is often contaminated with contaminants as well as debris, as well as snakes and wildlife in those areas. So wherever possible, just stay out of that flood water, and that lets us go to those other people that need our assistance.
Minister, can I press you on the issue of the dam? Should the levels have been dropped, and should flood mitigation play a greater role in the law that governs the releases from the dam?
I don't think you need to be a road scholar to work out that a litre of water in the dam today is a litre of water that will flood somebody's house tomorrow. But if some of the statistics and figures that we're hearing at the moment are correct, you would have had to empty half the dam to truly mitigate for what we're seeing at the moment. And as the Premier said, I mean, the Mile Lakes at the moment, we're looking at the biggest flood since 1929, and yet other parts of the city, it's 1 in 5. But mitigation is going to be a part of the post-operation review, and we will obviously have that discussion, and we'll be making sure that that every opportunity that is made, whether it be mitigating through flood walls, whether it be the dam, whether it be response times, whether it be planning, these things are always considered after you've had a major event like this.
Why can't you just raise a dam wall if you're talking about it for
Well, it's been on a matter of public debate for quite some time. I mean, it was going to be done in the previous century, and then Bob Carr cancelled it, and it's a matter of discussion at the moment.
Do you think 12 evacuation routes are enough to get people out of Western Sydney? Do you think that
At the moment, it appears to be, but you know, that's an operational matter. The SES and the police will obviously action as and when required.
You mentioned that it's too early to tell the clean-up cost of this, but insurance companies will be intrinsically involved in this issue.
Yeah.
Do you have a message to insurance companies or people who might be worried about claiming insurance?
Well, my message to the insurance company is to be make sure that you are honest with your policy holders, and there are very, very strict guidelines about how they operate. And after every disaster, we see insurance companies trying to reduce their payouts by being tricky with their wording. And my strong advice to them is don't do it, because we have very strong laws in this country to protect those policy holders.
Can I just ask a question on the declaration? Is it individuals who've had damage to their homes that are entitled to low interest loans, or is it just council?
Individuals as well as councils, yeah. So, but I would encourage anybody to get on the website and go through those natural disaster declarations, because a lot of people actually don't know that they're entitled to that sort of support. But this is not the end of it. This is the start of it when it comes to government assistance. And of course, those declarations will assist councillors in rebuilding their infrastructure.
Premier, can we ask you about COVID? The delays that we've seen with the Pfizer vaccine as a result of the any commentary on that front?
Oh, look, certainly we just ask people to be safe as they're moving around the city. In relation to those delays, I've not been briefed on them, but I assume obviously if there's distribution challenges because of the road closures, well, that's obviously going to delay. But I'm not concerned about that. We'll catch that up if it's only a few days. So
What
I'm
about
not.
what about the case of the reports that we're hearing of those two people up at Port Macquarie, those elderly people who have died, and there are sort of reports about that they have received the Pfizer vaccine?
Oh, I'm sorry. I mean, obviously, as you know, the federal government looks after the distribution of the vaccine to our aged care residents. Our deepest condolences to the families of those two who've died, but I don't have any information on that at all.
What do you make of Brendan Murphy's idea that vaccinated Australians may be able to quarantine at home or quarantine for a less period of time coming into the country?
I don't think we can have those conversations until the vast majority of our citizens have received the vaccine.
Last question.
That's it. Thank you.